I once believed her pregnancy was real. I hugged her, cried with joy, and praised every photo of that growing belly. But then I uncovered the horrifying truth that bump was silicone. And the baby never existed. She staged an entire pregnancy for what she called art, and me, I was part of her performance without ever knowing. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Don't forget to subscribe now to catch the chilling, infuriating stories we bring, ones you won't be able to look away from. The invitation arrived on creamy cardstock, hand-lettered in black ink that curled like ribbon. You are warmly invited to Becoming an Immersive Exhibit by Naomi Hale. No RSVP deadline, no +1 box. Just a single line at the bottom in Naomi's unmistakable handwriting. I hope you'll come, Elina. This matters. Elina Whitmore hadn't seen that name in 3 years. It wasn't a falling out that separated them. It was something murkier. A slow drifting like fog rolling across a field, thick, undramatic, irreversible. Naomi had moved cities, then changed phone numbers. Texts became sparse. Elina had stopped trying when her last voice message got no reply. Still, when she stepped out of the Uber in front of the converted brick gallery space in downtown Providence, Elina felt the familiar tug in her chest, not nostalgia, something closer to unease. Naomi always had a flair for the theatrical, but this felt like a stage set for something bigger than just an art show. Outside, sleek signage announced Becoming a Journey Through the Solitude of Motherhood. Inside, the lights were soft golden, not the harsh white of commercial exhibitions, but almost candlelit like a shrine. A long hallway unfolded before her, lined with towering canvas prints and shadow-boxed artifacts, ultrasound images, a single baby sock, a hospital wristband with Naomi's name blurred out. Each piece was captioned not with facts, but with emotions. Week 12, denial. Week 23, loneliness. Week 30, surrender. Ambient music pulsed like a heartbeat beneath it all. Elina paused in front of a portrait that filled the wall, Naomi, 7 months pregnant, standing barefoot on a rainy sidewalk. One hand on her belly, the other gripping a shopping cart. She looked radiant, exhausted, determined, alone. But something didn't sit right. The image was titled, I Bought Diapers Instead of Dinner. Elina's eyes narrowed. Naomi was wearing heels in that photo, not sensible flats, not swollen ankles, and that belly, perfectly round, perfectly high, sat too symmetrical. It was the kind of pregnancy bump you saw in modeling catalogs, not real life. A flicker of unease moved through her, but she pushed it aside. Maybe Naomi had finally embraced her old love of performance art. Maybe this whole thing was curated, exaggerated. That didn't make it a lie. Art didn't have to be literal. She moved on. The gallery opened into a high-ceilinged room with exposed beams and floor-to-ceiling windows, lights spilling across the polished concrete floors. Guests murmured, wine glasses in hand. Soft strings played from a corner where a live quartet hovered in the shadows. Candles glowed from inside hurricane vases on every table, each labeled with a different quote about motherhood. Some profound, some raw. One read, being a mother is learning about strengths you didn't know you had, and fears you didn't know existed. Naomi stood at the center of it all, draped in a fitted ivory dress that clung to her curves like silk. Her stomach, a prominent swell beneath the fabric, seemed to anchor her both visually and physically. She looked ethereal, untouchable, iconic, and impossibly composed. Elina blinked. Naomi's hair fell in smooth waves over her shoulders. Her skin glowed not in the puffy, flushed way pregnant women often did, but like she'd just stepped out of a spa. She wore 4-inch heels, held a crystal coupe of champagne, laughed without so much as a wince. She's 7 months pregnant. Elina knew the clinical signs. In her work, she'd counseled dozens of expecting mothers. Nausea, back pain, fatigue that hit like a truck. Most of them could barely climb stairs without needing to rest. Naomi moved through the crowd like a swan gliding over water. She hadn't expected to feel this level of detachment. But as Naomi turned, spotting her smiling, Elina realized her gut was already asking questions her mind hadn't dared voice. Elina. Naomi's arms opened, but not wide enough to embrace. She motioned instead for a gentle handhold, resting one manicured palm on Elina's forearm. My God, you look the same, Naomi said, her voice light as ever, like they'd only seen each other last week. Better, honestly. You're glowing, Elina replied, stepping back to take her in. Naomi's eyes gleamed. Pregnancy'll do that, or so they say. She chuckled and gestured toward the open bar. Get something the elderflower mocktails divine. As Elina turned to order, she caught a glimpse of Naomi from the side, angled deliberately. Her hand drifted to her stomach in a slow, deliberate arc, patting it once, then sliding her palm away with dramatic grace, like a gesture rehearsed for photographs. But the bartender's voice pulled her back. Would you prefer it with Prosecco, he asked casually. Elina blinked. She's drinking. The man smiled. Oh, just a splash. She said it's French and small batch. Practically medicinal. Practically? Elina took her drink and turned back just as the lights dimmed. A hush fell across the crowd. Naomi stepped up to the small stage flanked by two photographs projected on giant screens behind her, both images of her cradling her belly in different poses shot in natural light, tears in her eyes. Her voice rang out steady and low. "Good evening, and thank you for witnessing this with me." She paused. "I'm standing here as a woman who is growing another life inside her body, alone. Not because of abandonment, not because I made a mistake, but because I chose this." Another pause. "I chose motherhood not as a consequence, but as a calling. And I chose to share it this way, publicly, painfully, artistically, because for women like me, the world often only believes what it sees framed behind glass." She gestured behind her. "Each piece in this room represents a fragment of truth. Not always mine, sometimes borrowed, sometimes stolen, but always real for someone." Elina stiffened. "What?" Naomi's tone softened near reverent. "I dedicate this exhibit to the mothers who grieve quietly, to the ones who don't have baby showers, who don't have birth plans, who only have empty cribs and silent lullabies. This is for them, and for all the people who never knew how close the women in their lives were to breaking." Applause erupted. Elina stood still. Naomi's eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on Elina's. A knowing pause passed between them, brief, almost imperceptible, but it landed heavy. And then Naomi smiled, placed a hand on her belly again, and whispered into the microphone, "Sometimes becoming a mother isn't about the child, it's about what you lose in yourself, and what you're willing to perform to survive." The room fell into reverent silence. And in that silence, Elina heard the first crack in her own certainty. The applause returned, louder, longer. People rose to their feet, champagne flutes clinked, cameras flashed. Naomi bowed her head, slightly glowing in the center of her curated pain, but Elina stood frozen, drink untouched. Because what Naomi had just performed wasn't vulnerability, it wasn't authenticity, it was a performance. And Elina, trained to recognize dissociation, fabrication, psychological displacement, felt her chest tighten. Something wasn't right. And whatever it was hiding in plain sight, wrapped in ivory silk, lit by gallery spotlights, celebrated with hashtags and bouquets. Naomi had always loved to be seen. But this was different. This time she wasn't just seen, she was believed. And that Elina realized was far more dangerous. The champagne flutes had emptied, the violinists were packing their bows, and the gallery lights had softened into amber shadows when Naomi found Elina again. They stood near the side exhibit where a rotating installation of shadowy ultrasound scans glowed on transparent screens. Naomi's silhouette shimmered as she approached, glass in hand. This time a sparkling elderflower soda, no alcohol, at least not visibly. "You stayed," she said, not as a compliment, but as a quiet observation. "I did," Elina replied, turning from the projection of a fetus in utero. "It was powerful, beautiful." Naomi gave a practiced, modest nod. "That means a lot, coming from you." There was a pause, not awkward, just unfamiliar. Two people relearning the rhythm of a conversation once fluent. Elina studied Naomi's face. The same elegant bone structure, the same ocean-colored eyes. But something had shifted. Her expressions didn't quite land like they used to, like an actress nailing the words but missing the pulse behind them. "It's really been forever, hasn't it?" Naomi finally said, brushing a stray curl from her temple. 3 years. 4. 3 years, 2 months, Elina replied without thinking. Naomi raised a brow, amused, still counting time like a therapist. Elina didn't respond to the joke. Instead, she asked gently, "And how are you, really?" Naomi looked at her, unblinking. "Pregnant," she said. "And you know, overwhelmed, grateful, every cliché in the book." Her hand dropped instinctively to her stomach again, that fluid motion, the practiced touch, almost too perfect. Elina smiled, but her mind filed the gesture away. "And the father?" she asked, careful with the phrasing. Naomi hesitated just a breath too long. "A man who doesn't exist anymore," she said finally with a half laugh that didn't meet her eyes. "At least not in the form that matters." Elina tilted her head. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. His story doesn't belong in this one." Naomi turned her body slightly as if to signal that part of the topic was closed. "This journey has been mine. That's why the work resonates. It's not about a couple. It's about a woman and a body that became something more." "But are you getting the support you need?" Elina pressed. "Prenatal care checkups?" "I'm fine." Naomi's smile was immediate, wide and fixed. "I've been doing this my own way. No hospitals, no machines, just me, my midwife, and trust in the process." Elina blinked. "You're delivering at home?" "Of course." Naomi's voice held a defensive edge. "The medical industry treats women like statistics. I'm not a vessel. I'm an experience." "That's bold." Naomi laughed again, but there was a flicker in her eyes. "That's me, right? Always the bold one." The conversation drifted from there, Naomi pointing out a few visitors from the local art scene. Elina nodding through updates about the nonprofit Naomi had co-founded, recently focused on maternal wellness in underserved communities. But Alina's thoughts never strayed far from the holes in the narrative. No name for the father, no hospital records, no obstetrician mentioned, a vague midwife, home birth, complete detachment from anything clinical. For a woman 7 months into her first pregnancy, it felt more like performance than plan. By the time Elina stepped out of the gallery into the chilled night, the unease had settled in her bones. The streets were slick with rain that had fallen earlier, puddles mirroring the streetlights like pools of molten amber. She pulled her coat tight and walked 3 blocks before hailing a rideshare needing the air the space. The driver didn't speak. Elina appreciated the silence. When she got home, an apartment on the 3rd floor of a brownstone off Hope Street, she towed off her shoes and went straight to her desk. She didn't bother turning on music or pouring wine. Instead, she opened her laptop and typed Naomi Hale Instagram. It wasn't hard to find. Her handle hadn't changed. Neither had her aesthetic. Still muted tones, still artfully staged candids. But now it was saturated with pregnancy content. Rows and rows of bump photos, captions like week 18 craving rain and solitude or week 26 a storm and a heartbeat. But it was the photos themselves that held Elina captive. The belly looked different in almost every one. Sometimes high and tight, sometimes softer, rounder, sometimes low and wide. In one shot, Naomi stood in a mirror wearing a white robe, her bump prominent, the fabric open just enough to suggest intimacy. In another, she lounged on a couch, knees tucked up, the belly somehow less defined. Elina zoomed in. The skin was smooth, yes, but there was no linea nigra, no stretch marks, not even the gentle skin shadow that often showed up around the navel. Everything was immaculate. Too immaculate. She clicked into the comments. They were surprisingly sparse. For someone with 20,000 followers, the likes were moderate. Comments were minimal. And oddly, none from the names Elina recognized as their old circle, no Sophia, no Jules, no Lana. Not even a single emoji from Blake, who had once been Naomi's roommate and swore she'd be her maid of honor. Elina scrolled further. A post from 3 weeks ago, week 28, I feel her move at night like waves against glass. It had 22 likes. Another post today, we built the crib. Tomorrow I build myself again. 8 likes, 1 comment, a generic beautiful from an account that looked like a bot. She opened Facebook and next. Naomi's profile was public. There too she found photos, but only ones from the exhibition. Nothing personal, no baby registry, no community shower, no candid phone snapshots from friends tagging her, no mentions from anyone in real life. Naomi's online world was sealed, self-contained, controlled. Elina stared at the screen. She wasn't looking for proof, not yet, but she was looking for something to hold on to, something organic, messy, real. But Naomi's pregnancy was pristine, cinematically vacant. Her cursor hovered over the share button on one of the posts. She didn't press it. Instead, she leaned back, her mind spinning with memories from college, the way Naomi had once claimed she had a stalker only to admit a week later she'd made it up for attention after her art show flopped. The time she faked food poisoning to skip her final critique. The way she once told a donor she had endometriosis, then swore Elina to secrecy, only to contradict the story weeks later. But she had also been kind, thoughtful when she wanted to be. She cried when Elina lost her father. She stayed up for hours editing Elina's grad school application essay. She bought Elina her first pair of red heels. The friendship had always felt like this tipping between devotion and performance. Elina closed her laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Finally, she walked to her hallway mirror, the one across from her bookshelf, and stared at her own reflection. Tired eyes, slight wrinkle between her brows from all the squinting at clients' case files. She wondered, not for the first time, if she was seeing too much, reading too deep, or not deep enough. She picked up her phone and opened Naomi's messages. The last one was from 6 months ago, thinking of you today. Hope your client got the breakthrough you were hoping for. XOXON. Elina had never replied. She tapped a new message window. Typed Naomi. I meant it when I said the exhibit was beautiful. You look strong. Hope you're getting the support you need, truly. She hovered, then hit send. Read receipt off. She put the phone down and turned off the hallway light. The apartment settled into silence. And in that stillness, a question took shape, not one she could ask yet, but one that now pulsed beneath everything she thought she knew. If a woman wants the world to see her as pregnant, how far would she go to make them believe it? And what happens when no one asks if it's real? Because they'd rather believe the image than the woman behind it. Elina didn't have answers. But tonight, for the first time in years, she wasn't just a therapist. She was a witness. And maybe, just maybe, she was the only one paying attention. The next morning, Elina sat in her kitchen laptop, open coffee untouched. Outside, the sky was a watercolor of winter gray and bare tree limbs, wind tapping the window like fingers searching for a crack. Inside, her apartment smelled faintly of bergamot and burnt toast. She hadn't realized how long she'd let the slice sit in the toaster before the edges turned black. But it didn't matter. Not today. Because something was wrong. And her gut, the same one that guided her through years of clinical sessions, through fragile confessions and buried traumas, was refusing to quiet down. Naomi's pregnancy didn't feel real. Elina didn't want to think that, didn't want to believe it, but here she was, fingers hovering over her keyboard, about to do something that crossed an invisible line. The kind of line professionals like her weren't supposed to breach. But she wasn't Naomi's therapist. She was her friend. At least she had been. Elina opened the city's hospital network. As a licensed counselor affiliated with several regional clinics, she still had limited access to cross-institutional patient search directories. It was mostly for continuity of care when a client moved, when records needed to transfer, but today it became something else entirely. She typed in the name Naomi Hale. A blinking cursor, loading, then the results screen populated. Nothing. No prenatal visits, no imaging records, no labs, no maternity consults, not at St. Mary's, not at Rhode Island General, not even a flagged ER visit in the last year. Elina sat back in her chair. Okay, she told herself. That doesn't mean anything. Some women use private care. Boutique midwives, off-grid services. It's 2025 and people birth babies in bathtubs with eucalyptus candles and Instagram Live. It's not impossible. But her fingers moved again. She pulled up Google and typed Providence Holistic Midwife Naomi Hale, nothing. She tried Naomi Hale birth doula, nothing. Then she remembered something Naomi had said in passing during their brief conversation at the gallery. I've been working with a woman from Larchmont Small Practice, really sacred space. Elina searched for Larchmont Midwife Providence and found a clinic tucked in the East End Sacred Root Women's Wellness. She clicked on the website. The aesthetic matched Naomi's exactly, pastel icons, vines of lavender along the borders, phrases like honoring womb wisdom and birthing the divine. There was a phone number at the bottom, a landline. Elina hesitated. She stared at her phone for a long time. Then, without letting herself think further, she tapped the number and lifted the receiver. A woman answered, her voice warm but guarded. Sacred Root, this is Juniper. Elina paused. Hi. I was hoping to speak with someone about a potential patient. I'm a licensed counselor, Elina Whitmore. I just wanted to confirm if a Naomi Hale has been working with your practice. There was a pause, the sound of shuffling papers. Do you have a release form? No, Elina took a breath. It's not for clinical use. I'm just trying to verify something. Off record. Sorry, Juniper said, her voice tightening. I can't confirm or deny anything without proper documentation. Patient confidentiality. I understand, Elina said quickly, but just so I'm clear, if someone was actively receiving care here, would they typically have a file? Juniper paused again, then said, everyone we work with is on record, even our cash pay clients. I see. Have a nice day, Ms. Whitmore. The line went dead. Elina set the phone down slowly. Her stomach churned, not from guilt, but from the clarity that now unfolded with terrifying calm. There was no record. Not in hospitals, not in midwife clinics, not in any system that should by the 7th month of pregnancy have anything documented. It wasn't just an absence. It was a silence, a constructed void. She leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. This was about reality bending around a person who knew how to manipulate sightlines, who knew how to curate a version of herself, so convincing no one ever questioned what might be missing. And it wasn't the first time. Elina's mind flashed back, vivid, uninvited. Sophomore year, Brown University. Naomi had called her at 2 a.m. sobbing. I think I have appendicitis, she'd said, voice trembling. Elina had rushed to her dorm, driven her to urgent care. They waited 2 hours in cold fluorescent light before the attending physician announced the tests were clean, no inflammation, no issue. Naomi had smiled almost sheepishly. Maybe I just overreacted, she'd said. Sorry for the drama. Later, Elina would find out Naomi had a critique scheduled the next day for her installation art class. She'd been behind. The absence bought her a week's extension. Then came the disappearance, junior year. Naomi had vanished for a full day after a breakup with her older boyfriend, a graduate student in the philosophy department. No one could reach her. Police were nearly called. Flyers were drafted. And then, just before midnight, Naomi walked into the dorm lounge like nothing had happened, sipping tea. I just needed space, she said. I didn't think people would panic. But Elina had seen her eyes that night. There was no shame in them, only satisfaction, relief, as if the chaos had purged something ugly from inside her. They'd had a fight about it. Naomi cried, accused Elina of being controlling, of not understanding what heartbreak felt like. Elina had backed down, like she always did. But now, 10 years later, that same shadow crept across her memory, vivid, chilling, undeniable. It wasn't just performance with Naomi. It was pathology. Elina stood from her chair, restless now. She paced to the window, pulled back the curtain. A gray afternoon streets washed clean by overnight rain, the city quiet. And somewhere in this city, Naomi was walking around with a fabricated pregnancy, or an illusion of one, or something even darker, something she hadn't yet named. Elina turned from the window and walked toward the bookshelf. She reached up, pulled down a box labeled college. Inside were old photos, journals, letters, relics from a more innocent time. She pulled out a picture, her and Naomi at the senior art showcase. Naomi's installation had been a performance piece titled Exposure. It featured her standing naked in a glass cube, eyes closed, letting strangers write words on her skin in black marker. People had called it brave, raw, feminist, vulnerable. But Elina remembered what Naomi whispered afterward, giggling. No one ever writes what they really think. They only write what they want to be seen saying. Elina had laughed then. She wasn't laughing now. She put the photo back in the box and sat on the couch, gripping her knees. She needed to talk to someone. But who? If she went to the authorities, what would she say? My friend is faking a pregnancy because I don't see any hospital records. It wasn't enough. Not yet. She needed something tangible. A misstep, a crack in the story. But first, she had to accept the truth. Naomi wasn't just lying. She was building something, a world, a narrative, a performance layered in meaning and metaphors, something designed to protect her from the emptiness beneath it. And Elina? She was the first person in the audience who had stopped applauding. She picked up her phone, opened the gallery website again, clicked on the contact tab. Naomi's email was listed. Elina typed slowly, Naomi, your words stayed with me. So did your strength. I'd love to visit soon, see more of the nursery talk catch-up, if you're open to it. She paused, then added, you've always been a powerful storyteller. I want to understand this chapter better. She hit send. If Naomi was staging a performance, Elina had just stepped back into the theater. But this time she wasn't watching passively. She was looking for the wires behind the curtain. And she wasn't leaving until she found them. It was a cloudy Thursday when Elina showed up at Naomi's door, gift bag in hand, nerves tightly wound beneath a practiced smile. She'd texted that morning, casual and light. Picked up something for the baby I couldn't wait to give you. Mind if I stop by? Naomi replied in under 3 minutes. Of course, come anytime after 2. The house is a mess though. But when Elina pulled up to the white townhouse tucked near Blackstone Park, nothing about the place resembled disarray. The hedges were trimmed with surgical precision. The porch had been swept clean. A ceramic wind chime clinked gently in the breeze, unnervingly serene. She rang the bell. A heartbeat later, the door opened. Naomi stood barefoot, wrapped in a cream cashmere sweater and loose drawstring pants. Her face was bare, glowing. The bump beneath the sweater curved prominently, too perfectly. Hey, Naomi beamed. You're early. I love it. She pulled Elina in for a brief side hug embrace, one arm slightly angled to protect the belly. Again, always the careful choreography. Elina held out the bag. A little something. Organic, gender-neutral, overpriced, I blame the boutique downtown. Naomi laughed light and musical. You didn't have to. Of course I did, Elina said, stepping into the house. And instantly she felt it. Too quiet, too clean. Every surface gleamed. The faint scent of lemon polish hung in the air. On the hallway console sat a soy candle flickering beside a carefully stacked pile of pregnancy books. Each title arranged spine out like props on a set. Naomi gestured her down the hallway. Want to see the nursery? I'd love to, Elina said, her voice even. They turned left into a softly lit room painted a dusty blush. A crib stood in the center, still wrapped in its plastic casing. A mobile stars and moons dangled above, tags still attached. On the dresser sat rows of onesies, still folded, still stickered. Nothing had been used, not even opened. Elina blinked. Wow. Naomi smiled proudly. It's coming together. Has anyone helped you with the setup? Elina asked, wandering toward the changing table. Naomi shrugged. I like doing things myself. I want to bond with the space. You know, intention over perfection. It looks untouched, Elina said gently. Naomi laughed. It's the light, I swear. Everything looks sterile in this paint. Elina ran her hand along the edge of the dresser fingertips, catching on the slick adhesive of a label not yet removed. Then she moved toward the closet where stacks of baby blankets sat perfectly folded, pristine and symmetrical. Too symmetrical. Is the car seat in the car already? She asked, spinning toward Naomi. Naomi paused, then shook her head. Not yet. I'm still deciding which model. I want something sustainable and small. You know, for city driving. Makes sense, Elina replied. Her heart was hammering. Her voice didn't waver. Naomi leaned against the doorframe. I'm going to do it all from here, you know. What do you mean? The birth, she said softly. Right here, I've mapped it out. This room, this energy, it's all part of the plan. You're really not going to a hospital? No. Naomi's gaze sharpened. I won't be another woman lying flat on her back in fluorescent lights while strangers cut her open. I'll labor upright in silence and power. With candles, with control. Elina felt a chill. The way she said control made something twist in her stomach. And your midwife, she's okay with that plan. Naomi smiled again. She trusts me. She knows I can hold pain. Elina nodded slowly, trying not to flinch at the irony. They returned to the living room where Naomi brewed tea in a sleek stainless steel kettle and poured it into mismatched ceramic mugs. They sat in silence for a while, the clink of the spoon against porcelain the only sound. I've been thinking Elina said finally about our undergrad days. Naomi smirked. God, don't tell me you still have that photo of us dressed as matching Greek goddesses. I do, Elina smiled. But I was actually remembering that night you disappeared after Micah broke up with you. Naomi's face didn't change, but her shoulders tensed just slightly. I remember the campus panicking, Elina continued. Flyers printed, RAs crying. And then you walked in with your scarf perfectly knotted and said you just went to the beach. Naomi sipped her tea. I was young, she said, and dramatic. You scared a lot of people. Naomi looked up, then her eyes glittering. And yet everyone remembered me, didn't they? Elina blinked. That was the point. Naomi shrugged. Pain makes you visible. Silence again. Elina stood. I should probably head out. Thank you for the tea. Naomi walked her to the door. I'm glad you came, really. Just as Elina stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed. She instinctively reached into her purse and dropped it. The phone clattered against the tiles, skidding near the slightly open hallway closet. Damn it, she muttered, bending down to retrieve it. As she did, her peripheral vision caught something. A flash of peach-colored silicone. She froze. There behind the closet door ajar only by an inch was a folded object. Flesh-toned, curved, textured. Attached to it were thin adjustable straps half-tucked into a small cardboard box. It wasn't even hidden well, just shoved beside a broom and a yoga mat. A pregnancy belly. Elina's mouth went dry. She picked up her phone, slowly keeping her eyes trained forward as if nothing had happened. When she stood, Naomi was already walking back toward the living room. Elina exhaled. Her heart beat like war drums in her chest. Whatever she'd suspected, whatever she'd tried to rationalize, was no longer hypothetical. It was real. There was no baby. There never had been. She walked outside, legs trembling. As soon as the door closed behind her, her breath came out in a sharp, broken rush. She didn't look back. She got in the car and sat motionless for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel. She could still smell the lemon polish, still hear Naomi's voice in her head, I'll labor upright in silence and power. But all Elina could picture was that sagging, unused belly abandoned like a costume between cleaning supplies. It wasn't just a lie. It was a performance piece. And the worst part? It was working. Back at home, Elina opened her notes app and typed a single sentence. She has a silicone bump in the hallway closet. Then she closed the phone, placed it face down, and sat in the dark. The truth wasn't elusive anymore. It was standing in Naomi's hallway, quietly waiting to be found. And Elina had found it. Now she just had to figure out what the hell to do next. The rain started sometime after midnight, soft at first, just a whisper against the windows. Elina sat curled on her couch, knees tucked under a blanket, eyes locked on the television. Though she hadn't registered a word of the documentary playing, she'd seen the silicone bump. She had the proof. And yet nothing inside her felt settled. The truth, when finally revealed, didn't land like thunder. It didn't scream. It whispered. It pulsed through her body like the aftershock of betrayal, too familiar, too quiet, too private to scream about. Naomi was faking a pregnancy. But for what? To grift, to manipulate, or to perform. Elina's mind swung wildly between two poles. One moment, fury bloomed like fire. How dare Naomi involve her in something so profoundly dishonest? How dare she exploit the sacred weight of motherhood for what attention donations control? And then just as quickly, the fire would die, replaced by a hollow chill. What if it wasn't malicious? What if it was survival? What if this was Naomi's way of coping with a loss no one else had seen? Or worse, a fracture so deep that only illusion could contain it. She couldn't sleep. At 1:43 a.m., she threw on a hoodie, grabbed her keys, and drove toward her childhood home on the west side of town. She didn't text ahead. She didn't want time to prepare. She needed someone who wouldn't try to make it clinical or poetic. She needed her mother. The house was dark when Elina pulled up the porch light, casting a faint glow over the flower pots her mother still stubbornly watered every morning. She didn't knock. She still had a key. She let herself in, quietly expecting silence. But the kitchen light was on. Her mother stood at the counter, nursing a cup of tea, still in her robe. She didn't look surprised to see Elina. Couldn't sleep either, she asked gently. Elina shook her head. Her mother gestured to the kettle. Still warm. Want one? Please. They didn't speak until Elina was settled at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile. And even then, her words came slow, measured, unraveling with the care of someone removing stitches from old skin. She's not pregnant, Elina said finally. Her mother looked up. Naomi. Elina nodded. There's a silicone belly in her closet, tags still on the baby clothes, no hospital records, no doctor, no sonograms, nothing's real. Her mother didn't gasp, she didn't blink, she just exhaled slowly like someone watching a candle burn out. Did you ask her why, she asked softly? No, Elina's voice cracked. I didn't want to hear the answer. Because it might be worse than you imagined, her mother offered. Elina looked down into her tea. Because it might be better. Her mother reached across the table, placing her hand over Elina's. Her palm was warm, grounding. The way it used to be when Elina was 10 and terrified of thunderstorms. You think it's a performance, she said, but part of you wonders if it's something else. Elina nodded. What if she really believes it? What if it's not a lie she's telling everyone else, but a lie she's telling herself? Her mother sat back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap. When I lost the baby, she began quietly, I used to lie too. Elina blinked. You did? Her mother nodded, eyes distant. At church, at the market, to strangers. I'd still rest my hand on my stomach. I'd still talk about cravings. I'd smile when people asked about names. I didn't correct them when they said congratulations. You never told me that. I didn't want to burden you, her mother said. You were too young. But for weeks, maybe longer, I needed to pretend. Just until the ache stopped echoing. Elina felt something shift inside her, a crack where guilt and understanding bled together. Were you ashamed, she asked. No, her mother's answer was instant. I was shattered. And when you're shattered, you look for anything that helps you feel whole again. Even if it's a story you have to tell yourself. Silence fell between them like snowfall, soft, heavy. Maybe that's what Naomi's doing, Elina whispered, trying to be whole. Maybe her mother said, or maybe she's performing, or maybe it's both. Truth and fiction don't always live on opposite ends of a line. I just don't know if I can trust her anymore. Her mother tilted her head. Did you ever fully trust her? Elina opened her mouth, then paused. Memories flooded back. Naomi borrowing her car and returning it with half a tank. Naomi losing the deposit on a shared apartment. Naomi flirting with the professor Elina had quietly admired from a distance. All the little betrayals. All excused. She's complicated, Elina said finally. Her mother smiled softly. So are you. Elina looked away. This feels like a betrayal. Not just of trust, but of something sacred. Motherhood, loss, honesty. I don't know how to hold it. You don't have to, her mother said. You just have to decide if you want to be part of it. Elina met her gaze. What would you do? Her mother took a long sip of tea before answering. I'd want to scream and cry and hug her and shake her. And then I'd sit very still and ask her gently what she was trying so hard to protect. Elina swallowed hard. She might not answer, she said. She might not even know, her mother replied. They sat in silence again. The kind of silence that didn't press, didn't judge, just allowed space. I used to imagine what the baby would have looked like, her mother said quietly, almost to herself. Big brown eyes, wild curls. I'd see toddlers at the store and think, mine would be about that age now. Sometimes I still do. Elina felt tears pool at the corners of her eyes. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because that grief wasn't yours to carry, her mother said. But maybe now it is. In a different way. Elina nodded, wiping her cheek. I think Naomi's carrying something too, she said. Something she doesn't know how to name. Her mother stood across the kitchen and pulled Elina into a hug. A real one. No polite arm angles, no curated distance, just arms and breath and warmth. I trust you to find the name, she whispered. Elina clung to her mother like a child for a moment longer, then stepped back steadied. I need to see her again, she said. But this time I won't ask if she's okay. I'll ask who she is underneath all this. Her mother nodded. And if she doesn't answer, then I'll know, Elina said, that she's not ready and maybe never will be. The sky outside was lightening with the earliest hints of dawn, pale gold peeking over the treetops. The storm had passed. Elina walked to the front door, opened it, and turned back. Thank you. Her mother gave her a knowing smile. You've always had good instincts, Elina, even when they hurt. As Elina drove home, a question hung in the air between her and the steering wheel. What do you do when someone you love creates a version of themselves so convincing even they believe it? You either join them, or you begin the slow, painful work of remembering the truth and deciding what to do with it. The gallery looked different on the final day. The air inside felt quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The crowd had thinned, just a trickle of latecomers wandering through the exhibit heads, tilted lips pursed thoughtfully, pretending to understand what couldn't be explained. Elina walked in slowly, her boots echoing across the polished concrete. The lavender lighting was the same. The looping ambient soundtrack still pulsed softly beneath the surface. But to her it sounded distorted now, like a heartbeat that had gone arrhythmic. Naomi stood near the far wall, dressed in a linen wrap blouse and tailored pants. No bump today, no curve beneath her shirt, just fabric and flatness. For a moment Elina froze. Then Naomi turned. Their eyes met. Naomi smiled. Not startled, not caught. Welcoming. Elina, she said, her voice low, even as if they were simply resuming a conversation from earlier that morning. You came back. I had to, Elina replied, approaching. There's something we need to talk about. Naomi nodded, stepping to the side as if making space for truth to enter the room. I figured you would, she said. You always ask the right questions. That's why I missed you. Elina's throat tightened. Can we talk privately, she asked. Naomi glanced around the gallery, then gestured toward a side hallway. Of course. They passed through the narrow corridor lined with framed letters, fictional correspondence from a mother to her unborn child, then stopped at an unmarked wooden door. Naomi pulled a key from her pocket. This room isn't open to the public, she said. It's reserved. She pushed the door open. The space was small, windowless, lit only by a single spotlight fixed on the center. Beneath it stood a glass display case. Elina stepped in and stopped. Inside the case, suspended by invisible wires, was the silicone pregnancy belly, the same one she'd seen in Naomi's closet. It was cradled gently by a nest of white lace and silk, almost reverently arranged. Beneath it on a velvet plaque was a gold-embossed card that read, "The construct 7 months of becoming an object that birthed a story. A shape that gave form to grief. A mirror for the eye that dares to look closer." Elina stared. Naomi moved beside her, folding her arms. "I was wondering when you'd ask," she said softly. Elina turned to her. "You're not hiding it." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Hide what, the piece?" She gestured to the display. "That's what it is, a piece, a tool, a symbol. Isn't that what art is supposed to be?" Elina shook her head, voice quiet. "You wore that. You pretended to be pregnant in front of donors, friends, me." Naomi didn't flinch. "Curation," she said. "Every artist curates. You think this," she pointed at the silicone belly, "is different from makeup, from Instagram filters, from Spanx under a dress. It's all a costume. The only difference is how much truth you're willing to claim." Elina's voice hardened. "This isn't about aesthetics. This is about reality, about trust." Naomi smiled. "You're the first one to say that out loud," she said. "I've had hundreds of people walk through this gallery. Some cried, some said they felt seen, but none of them asked if it was real." She turned toward Elina fully, now her eyes steady. "Until you." Elina's heart thudded painfully. "So this was a test?" "No," Naomi said. "It was a story, one that only worked if people chose not to question it." "That's manipulation." Naomi shrugged. "Is it?" She took a step toward the case, gazing down at the artificial belly as if it were a sacred relic. "I wanted to know what it felt like," she said quietly. "To be seen as a mother, to occupy that space, to be touched gently, spoken to with reverence, offered seats on the train, smiled at by strangers." Her voice cracked slightly. "I wanted to feel what people feel when they believe you're creating life, even if I wasn't." Elina exhaled slowly. "So you lied." "I performed," Naomi replied, "and the world applauded." She looked up again. "You want to hate me. I can see it. But you can't decide if I'm insane or brilliant, grieving or dangerous. You're standing in the middle of the road with your hands shaking because everything you believe about identity, about womanhood and pain and performance is suddenly a little less clear." Elina's eyes burned. "It was real to me," she whispered. "You held your stomach, you talked to her, you said she kicked at night. I believed you. I wanted to believe you." Naomi stepped forward, voice soft. "Then you did what I hoped someone eventually would." Elina frowned. "What?" "You looked closer." They stood in silence. The silicone bump gleamed under the light, faintly textured like skin molded to fit a specific body. Naomi's body. The memory of her in that fitted white dress at the opening night flashed through Elina's mind again. How perfect she looked, how carefully composed. "How long?" she asked. Naomi tilted her head. "Since last spring." Elina's jaw clenched. "And there never was a pregnancy." Naomi hesitated. "There was a hope. There was a name I wrote in my journal. There was a bottle of prenatal vitamins I took religiously for 6 weeks." She looked away. "But no, there wasn't a heartbeat, not even a missed period." Elina sank onto a bench against the wall, the weight of Naomi's words collapsing inside her chest. "So it was always fiction." Naomi nodded. "But it told a truth," she said, "just not the one you wanted." Elina stared at the glass case. "You built this like a shrine. I built it like a mirror." Naomi walked to a small cabinet and pulled out a leather-bound guest book. She flipped through it, letting Elina glimpse the pages. Messages in different handwritings filled every line. "I felt less alone. Thank you for honoring this invisible pain. I lost my daughter at 30 weeks. This helped me breathe again." Elina looked away, ashamed of the lump in her throat. "They thought you were one of them," she whispered. "I was," Naomi said. "Just not in the way they expected." Elina stood again slowly, as if balancing on ice. "I came here to confront you, to accuse you. And now," Elina shook her head, "now I don't know if I want to cry or scream or walk out and never look back." Naomi nodded. "That means I did something right." Elina stared at her. "You sound proud." "I'm not," Naomi said. "I'm exhausted." She leaned against the wall, eyes closing briefly. "Do you know what it's like to wear grief like a costume, to let people coo at you, pity you, revere you, when inside there's just static?" Elina didn't answer. Naomi opened her eyes again. "You think I faked a pregnancy for attention," she said. "But what I really did was offer the world a metaphor they were desperate to believe." "You're not a metaphor," Elina snapped. "You're a person. And so am I. And I'm telling you right now, I can't be part of this." Naomi's smile faded. "I didn't ask you to be. Then what do you want from me?" Naomi looked down at the belly in the case. "I want someone to witness it. Without trying to fix it. Without trying to forgive it. Just see it." Elina swallowed hard. And then very softly she said, "I see it." They stood in silence again, the soft hum of the gallery returning to fill the space between them. Elina walked to the door. Her hand paused on the knob. One day she said, without turning around, someone's going to ask you what this cost. And you won't be able to frame it in gold or lace or velvet. Naomi's voice was almost a whisper. I know. Elina opened the door and stepped back into the light. Naomi didn't call it a confession. She called it a reveal. The next day she posted a video, 4 minutes and 23 seconds long. It opened with soft music, simple piano chords, and footage of Naomi sitting in a dim studio-like space, framed by 2 hanging portraits of her faux pregnancy at various trimesters. Her voice was calm, articulated, studied. For the last 9 months, she began, I've been conducting a living, breathing performance piece titled Motherhood is Perception. It was never meant to deceive. It was meant to invite. Elina watched it on her phone numb. We are a culture obsessed with the aesthetics of motherhood. Naomi continued, her tone almost soothing. The glow, the curve, the sacrifice, the miracle, but not the blood, not the rage, not the loss. We don't honor complexity, we consume imagery. So I gave them what they wanted, a beautiful lie. Cut to footage of Naomi walking through the city with her silicone bump, smiling, touching her belly, being offered seats, people waving, strangers cooing, a montage of kindness triggered by assumption. This project was supported by 5 international galleries, she said next, and funded by 2 academic institutions. I recorded interactions. I tracked commentary. I watched as people romanticized an experience I never had. Elina stared at the screen, face blank. I wanted to see how long I could live in a narrative, Naomi said, before someone questioned the story, before someone remembered to ask if I was okay, before someone saw past the glow. And then Naomi smiled. One person did? Elina's stomach dropped. She didn't say her name, but it was clear. Elina put the phone down slowly as if it might explode. Later that afternoon, Elina sat in her car outside her apartment, phone in hand, scrolling through the comments. They weren't angry. They were celebratory. This is genius! Naomi just redefined feminist art. This made me cry. Thank you for speaking the unspeakable. Her post from a week ago was still up, an Instagram story of Naomi's gallery opening, overlaid with warm words. Proud to support this strong mama. Art meets truth. She tapped through to her profile. Paused. Then without breathing, she pressed and held the story. Delete. Confirmation screen. Yes. It vanished. But the betrayal didn't. The phone buzzed. A message from Marlene, a mutual college friend. Did you see Naomi's video? Blew my mind. Was that you she was talking about? Another message, this time from a local art blogger Elina didn't even remember following. Would love to interview you about your perspective on Naomi's project. Can DM if easier. Elina turned her phone over on the passenger seat. She didn't respond. That night, her apartment felt like it had been emptied of air. She sat on the floor with a glass of wine, flipping through old photo albums. Real ones, paper, ink, the kind you couldn't edit with filters or delete with a tap. Naomi at 21 painting barefoot in their dorm room. Naomi in Elina's borrowed black dress, tipsy at a New Year's party. Naomi asleep on Elina's shoulder during a bus ride to a grief seminar 6 years ago, after Naomi's mother passed. Elina remembered that trip vividly. She remembered Naomi saying over breakfast at the hotel, I don't know how to grieve without someone watching. Back then it sounded poetic. Now it sounded like foreshadowing. The next morning, Elina sat at her desk and opened her therapy notes from her latest clients. She tried to focus, tried to bring her empathy to the forefront. But something had ruptured, something vital. She couldn't stop seeing Naomi's face. That serene detachment, that smile behind the lie, that certainty. Was it bravery, or was it emotional fraud dressed in silk? She picked up her phone, opened Instagram again. Naomi's follower count had jumped by 10,000 overnight. Her reel had passed 1.2 million views. And the press? God, the press was everywhere. Performance or provocation, the artist who faked a pregnancy and made the world feel. Naomi C., mother of the moment. They were turning her into a myth. And Elina, she was just the cautionary footnote, the friend who got too close, the mirror who shattered. By midday, Elina received another message, this time from a former patient. I know you knew her well. I just want to say, if it weren't for your story post, I never would have found Naomi's project. It helped me name something inside me I couldn't explain. Thank you for amplifying her voice. Elina stared at it. Her fingers hovered. Then she typed, I no longer support the project. I was misled. And pressed send. Then she blocked the sender. She wasn't angry. She was eroded. The worst part wasn't that Naomi lied. It was that the world didn't care. Because the lie was beautiful. Because the lie made them feel something. Because the lie fit a narrative they liked better than the truth. That night, Elina opened her journal. Not the digital one. The one she kept in pen. With smudges and tear stains and honesty. She wrote, what if the pain we don't share becomes performance in someone else's hands? What if art without ethics is just manipulation with better lighting? She paused, then underlined it twice. Then she wrote, I was used. But the worst part is I participated. 2 days later, she received a package. No return address. Inside a single item, a folded piece of the silicone belly cut neatly, almost surgically, along with a handwritten note on gallery-grade paper. We both wore it in different ways. Thank you for holding space. N. Elina dropped the note. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't over. It was evolving. Naomi had turned her into part of the narrative again, and Elina realized, to the world, Naomi's truth was now performance, and Elina's silence was complicity. And in a world that worships illusion with open arms and praises deception if it's artful enough, the truth wasn't enough anymore. It had to be curated, packaged, and if you didn't play along, you'd become invisible. Or worse, real. It started with a single clip. Naomi standing on the red circle of a TED Talk stage wearing a sleek black dress and no trace of her old persona. No maternity bump, no soft pastel tones, just shadow and steel. The video was titled Fake Baby, Real Pain. Elina clicked it almost involuntarily, the words punching through her gut like a slow bleed. The opening line, I faked a pregnancy for 9 months, and the world thanked me for it. Gasps in the audience, followed by dead silence. Naomi paced slowly across the stage, hands steady, voice velvet over razor wire. What does that say about us, she asked the crowd, about the way we treat motherhood, womanhood, truth? Elina's laptop screen glowed in the darkness of her apartment, casting Naomi's face across the room like a ghost that refused to leave. We celebrate the image of motherhood, Naomi continued, but recoil from its reality. Stretch marks, postpartum depression, miscarriage, stillbirth. We want the glow, not the hemorrhage, the bump, not the breakdown. The audience was captivated. And online, the wildfire had begun. Within 48 hours, Naomi trended on every major platform, her face plastered across headlines. Performance or prophecy, the artist who made us rethink motherhood, Naomi C. disrupting the narrative. One contraction at a time, even if they were fake. Fake pregnancy, real impact. Instagram reels, TikTok breakdowns, podcasts analyzing her meta-commentary on reproductive identity. Even Oprah reposted the TED clip with a comment, not sure how I feel about this, but I can't look away. But admiration wasn't universal. A fierce countercurrent surged beneath the applause. Women who had actually endured pregnancy, the sickness, the trauma, the life-altering shifts pushed back hard. She wore my pain like a costume, art. This is narcissism wrapped in lace. 9 months of lies is not empowerment. Forums lit up, threads unraveled, articles dissected every word Naomi said and didn't say. Feminist scholars wrote dueling op-eds. Therapists weighed in on the ethics. A midwife collective in Portland issued a public letter condemning the project as an erasure of embodied female experience. And somewhere tangled in the middle of the mess was Elina. It began quietly. A missed appointment here, a rescheduled session there, then an email from the clinic director. Hey Elina, some of your clients have asked to transfer. Just wanted to flag it, let's talk soon. She told herself it would pass, that it was just noise, until she opened Yelp. Her page had been bombed with 1-star reviews. Not about her work, about Naomi. How can I trust someone who helped a fraud? If you co-sign that kind of deception, you shouldn't be in mental health. Was she in on it? Did she lie to clients too? Elina closed the laptop and sat back in her chair, stomach coiled. It didn't matter that she never approved Naomi's project. It didn't matter that she was blindsided like everyone else. All that mattered was that she had once publicly, enthusiastically stood beside her. And now she was collateral. At the grocery store, a woman whispered as Elina passed the produce aisle. That's her, she said to her friend, the fake friend. At the cafe 2 blocks from the clinic, the barista asked awkwardly, Hey, is it true you used to know that Naomi woman? Even her mailman, usually all smiles, handed her a parcel with lowered eyes. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a byline in someone else's viral story. At night, she stopped sleeping. Her dreams looped Naomi's TED Talk like a curse. Sometimes Elina was in the crowd clapping. Sometimes she was on stage trying to scream, but no words came. She started journaling again. I used to believe in human insight, she wrote. Now I believe in PR. 1 week after the TED Talk, Naomi's publisher announced a book deal. Becoming Mother, What We Choose to Carry. It topped the Amazon pre-order list in hours. Elina stared at the announcement graphic, Naomi's face half in shadow, half in golden light, the bump outlined like a halo. And she realized Naomi wasn't being canceled. She was being canonized. A reporter emailed her. Subject request for comment. We'd love to hear from you as Naomi's former friend and a psychological professional. What did you know? When did you know it? Do you believe her? Elina didn't reply. She deleted the message. Then she deactivated her LinkedIn. She wanted no part of this, no quotes, no headlines. But silence felt like complicity, and speaking felt like betrayal, and both tasted like ash. That Friday, she sat in her office with the blinds drawn, sipping lukewarm tea, trying to focus on a patient intake form. The door opened. Her supervisor leaned in. Elina, she said gently, do you have a minute? Elina nodded. The supervisor stepped in, shutting the door behind her. I want you to know we're reviewing the situation with compassion, she began, but a few clients have formally requested reassignment. Some have expressed discomfort. Elina sat stiffly. Because of Naomi. The supervisor paused. because of the perception that you may have enabled something harmful, whether it's true or not. Elina looked down at her hands. They were trembling. By the end of the day, she had 4 fewer clients on her calendar. And 1 less identity. Not trusted counselor. Now just that woman from the Naomi story. That night she turned off her phone, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark of her living room, the glow of Naomi's world still pulsing behind her eyes. She wasn't envious. She was devastated because Naomi had made the world feel. And Elina had made herself invisible trying to do the right thing. And still people loved the artist more than the truth. Because the artist gave them a story. And Elina, she only gave them reality. And no one wanted that anymore. Elina didn't go looking for answers. Not at first. She thought she was done, washed out of Naomi's orbit like a ghost that finally stopped haunting its own past. But truth has a way of scratching from underneath like roots cracking through concrete, silent but persistent. It began with an old wedding photo. One of Naomi's early gallery donors had posted it in a tribute thread, praising her evolution as an artist. Elina had seen Naomi's face in every filtered format over the past week on screens and articles on TikToks dissecting her body language, but this was different. This was her at 23. Younger, softer eyes less guarded. And beside her, a man Elina had never seen. Dark hair, clean-shaven, tall, smiling like he didn't know how not to. Elina froze. She stared at the name tag on the man's tuxedo jacket. It read, Gabriel. No last name, no links, no comments about him, just a caption under the photo. Back when Naomi believed life could grow inside her. She couldn't shake it. Couldn't stop turning it over in her mind like a thorn under skin. That one sentence. Back when Naomi believed. Elina opened her laptop, searched, dug. Obituaries, court records, hospital mentions. Nothing on Gabriel directly. But one record showed a fetal death certificate from 7 years ago. Stillbirth at 22 weeks. The mother listed as Naomi Claire Caldwell. Father unknown. She stared at the PDF until her eyes stung. Naomi had been pregnant. Really pregnant. Once. And she never told a soul. That night, Elina drove 3 hours out of the city. To the edge of a quiet town Naomi once mentioned offhandedly years ago. Something about a childhood memory. Fireflies, cows in the distance, the smell of river water. She pulled up to a modest, faded blue house on a cracked cul-de-sac. No cars in the driveway. A small wooden sign read, Mrs. Caldwell, retired seamstress. She knocked. And waited. When the door opened, it creaked like it hadn't been used in days. The woman on the other side was slight in a long cardigan and faded jeans. Her gray hair was pulled back in a fraying braid, her hands speckled with age spots and scars that looked older. Can I help you? She asked, voice dry but not unkind. I'm Elina, she said. I used to be Naomi's friend. The woman didn't move, but her eyes flickered. Still is, she asked. Elina swallowed. I don't know anymore. Mrs. Caldwell stepped aside. Then you better come in. The house was quiet, dimly lit. Smelled like lavender and mothballs and some memory that hadn't aged well. She poured tea without asking. Didn't speak for a long time. Then finally she said, she's always been different. Naomi, since she was small, always pretending, always turning herself into something else. Birds, superheroes, saints. Once she spent a whole week speaking with a French accent and said she was a painter from Marseille. Elina gave a soft, painful laugh. She told me once she wanted to become motherhood, not just experience it. Mrs. Caldwell didn't smile. She always wanted to wear something that couldn't be taken from her. Elina's chest tightened. I found a record. From 7 years ago, there was a stillbirth. Mrs. Caldwell didn't flinch. Yes, she said. Gabriel? Her voice cracked slightly. Eloped at 22, moved to Oregon. He was kind, but poor, and sick. Cancer. It took him before the baby could. Then she came back here, hollowed out. Elina swallowed. She never told anyone. She never had the words, Mrs. Caldwell replied. She only had stories. There was silence for a long moment. Then Elina whispered, was that the first time? Mrs. Caldwell's eyes darkened. No, she said. It started much earlier. The next words came slowly like a wound reopening. Mrs. Caldwell stared into her cup of untouched tea. She was 16 when I found out. Quiet, withdrawn, no appetite. I thought it was depression. Elina said nothing. She was pregnant, the woman said, and wouldn't say by whom. Then her voice dropped barely audible. But I knew. The name wasn't spoken. Didn't have to be. Elina's hands clenched the fabric of her coat. Mrs. Caldwell stared straight ahead. I took her. To the clinic. Told her we had no choice. He would have killed us both. Tears filled her eyes now, but she didn't let them fall. She never forgave me, she said, and she never told anyone else. She looked at Elina finally. That's the first time she changed her name in her mind. She said she wanted to be someone else. Anyone else. From then on. Elina drove back through the dark with her windows cracked and tears streaking silently down her face. So many pieces made sense now. Naomi wasn't just a liar. She was a survivor. Of secrets buried too deep for light to reach. She had lived her whole life performing personas because no one ever gave her permission to just be Naomi. Later that night, Elina opened her notebook again. And this time she didn't write about betrayal or fame or perception. She wrote, "There are people who perform to deceive, and there are people who perform to survive." She never wanted to be seen, only to be believed. Then she closed the book and sat still in the dark. For the first time since this all began, she understood. Naomi hadn't stolen motherhood. She had borrowed it, because the world had once ripped it away. And she was still trying to feel what it meant to hold it even if it wasn't real, because her pain had been invisible for too long. And this time, she made sure it had a stage. The second exhibition felt colder, slicker, sharper, less about feeling and more about spectacle. Elina walked through the doors of the downtown gallery, the kind with towering white walls and ambient drones, humming like echoes in a cathedral. The crowd was different this time. Bigger, smarter dressed, more critics, fewer friends. A long line curled around the entry wall, waiting to take selfies beside a new installation, a mirrored hallway lined with blown-up ultrasound prints, none real. At the center of it all stood Naomi, dressed in navy silk, her face painted with just enough warmth to appear composed but not inviting. She spotted Elina immediately, didn't smile, didn't flinch, just tilted her head slightly, like she'd been expecting this. Elina waited until the speeches were over, until Naomi stepped off the small stage and began shaking hands like a politician running on grief. And then she stepped forward. Naomi. Their eyes met. A pause. One beat, two. Then Naomi offered a restrained nod. You came. Elina didn't return it. I need to talk to you alone. Naomi glanced at the sea of guests, then back. Now. Yes, Elina said. Naomi held her gaze a moment longer, then turned on her heel. This way. They slipped into a back room likely meant for storage, but temporarily transformed into a minimalist lounge. A single leather bench, a tea cart, a black and white print of a screaming child on the wall. Art, of course. Naomi shut the door, folded her arms. Well, Elina didn't waste a second. You lied to everyone. You manipulated emotion for spectacle. You turned grief into branding. Naomi's eyes narrowed. You think this is about clout? I think this is about control, Elina snapped. And self-worship. You faked something sacred. You made people believe in a story that was never yours to tell. Naomi's voice dropped. Icy. You still think the story belongs to someone else. Because it does, Naomi. It belongs to every woman who begged for a heartbeat and got silence. You wore their suffering like a costume. Naomi stepped forward slowly. You mean like I once did? Elina's throat tightened. I know about Gabriel, she said, quiet, raw. I know about your stepfather. Naomi's face didn't move, but her eyes changed. Just for a moment, like something ruptured. Then she blinked it away. You think that gives you moral high ground, she said, voice rising. You think understanding a sliver of me makes you judge, jury, executioner. I'm not trying to destroy you, Elina said. I'm trying to stop you from destroying yourself. Naomi laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just exhausted. Destroy myself, she said. Do you have any idea what it's like to carry nothing and be looked at like you're carrying everything? To feel like a liar even when you're telling the truth because your body refuses to participate in the fantasy society demands. She stepped closer. I was never enough, not for my mother, not for any man, not for the system. So I built something they couldn't take, a story. You built a monument on a grave, Elina said, voice trembling. Naomi's breath caught. I built a language, she whispered, for women who live outside the narrative. But it wasn't real, Elina said. Naomi looked her straight in the eyes. Neither was my womb. There was silence. Crackling, heavy, final. Then Naomi stumbled. Her foot caught on the base of the bench. She reached for the wall but missed. Her body hit the ground too fast for Elina to react. Naomi. Elina dropped to her knees. Naomi's eyes fluttered, unfocused. Elina, I haven't slept in 3 days, she murmured. The pills just blur things now. Her head lolled. Elina, don't let them turn me into a monster. Naomi, Elina shook her. Naomi, stay awake. Hey, look at me. A gallery worker burst in, phone already dialing. She's not responding. No, she's breathing, but call an ambulance. Now, Elina knelt beside her, holding Naomi's cold hand. Her pulse weak. Her body trembling. The woman who had performed motherhood now looked like a child lost in a world of symbols she couldn't control anymore. And Elina, despite everything, still cared. Still hurt. Still grieved what was left of the friend she once had. Outside sirens approached. The crowd gathered. Phones came out. People recording. Whispers spreading. The artist collapsed. The performance cracked. And finally, Naomi was no longer a narrative. She was a patient. And the price of the performance came due. There was no art on the walls now. Just fluorescent light humming above cream-colored tiles and the quiet hum of machines that didn't need to be beautiful, just functional. Naomi lay in a narrow bed, her wrist bound loosely to a safety strap, her eyes flickering under closed lids. She had been unconscious for 17 hours. Elina sat outside the room, arms crossed, fingers twitching. She hadn't slept. The air smelled of antiseptic and recycled sadness. A social worker had met her at the door this morning with a clipboard and a forced smile. Dr. Elina Wu, you've been listed as Naomi Caldwell's emergency emotional contact. Elina almost laughed. Emotional contact, as if feelings had forms, as if friendship still applied. She's not technically under arrest, the woman continued, but the court has issued a 72-hour psychiatric hold under Emergency Evaluation Code 5150. We need you to sign off on entry. Elina stared down at the pen and signed. Because what else could she do? The room was windowless. Naomi looked smaller now, deflated. The woman who once strutted through exhibitions like a storm in velvet had been replaced by someone barely tethered to the present. She stirred when Elina sat down. Didn't speak right away. Just stared at the wall. Her voice when it came was dry and half-broken. I thought maybe this time they'd understand. Elina's jaw clenched. Understand what? That I didn't fake a pregnancy to lie, Naomi said, blinking slowly. I faked a pregnancy to tell the truth. Just not my truth, everyone's. Elina let the silence settle before responding. The gallery canceled your next show. Naomi's lips curved upward barely. Figures, too close to actual madness, I guess. They like women unhinged, just not diagnosed. Elina hesitated. Do you know where you are? Naomi turned her head. Somewhere that smells like bleach and penance. You're in a psychiatric facility, voluntarily but under court review. Naomi nodded. They think I'm a danger. To yourself, Elina said quietly. And maybe others. You manipulated donors, fabricated medical records, used real baby names on fake registries. Naomi tilted her head, looking amused. That's not madness, she whispered. That's marketing. Elina's stomach turned. But it wasn't just that, Naomi added. I wanted to feel pregnant without bleeding, that's all. Later that day, Elina sat in a small courtroom in the hospital wing, clinical, impersonal, devoid of warmth. The judge was a stern woman with half-moon glasses and no time for poetry. A panel of experts had gathered to assess, was Naomi criminally liable for fraud? Or was this performance art so blurred with trauma that punishment became a secondary concern? Elina was called to the witness stand not as a friend, but as a licensed clinical psychologist. She took a breath, looked at Naomi across the room. Naomi wore a simple sweatshirt now. No makeup, no audience, just the nakedness of consequence. Dr. Wu, the judge, said you've known the defendant for how long? Since university, Elina replied. Almost a decade. Would you characterize her behavior in the past year as consistent with a diagnosable psychiatric condition? Elina hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Can you elaborate? She exhibits symptoms consistent with borderline personality disorder, Elina said. Emotional instability, identity disturbance, chronic feelings of emptiness, intense and unstable interpersonal relationships. Naomi looked down at her hands. Elina continued. She's not malicious in the traditional sense, but she has a long history of trauma that was never metabolized. She doesn't lie to deceive. She lies to exist. The room went quiet. When Naomi was asked to speak, she did not deliver a monologue. She didn't quote Sartre or Duchamp or Adrienne Rich. She just said, I know I faked being pregnant, but I didn't fake the grief. I didn't fake the loss. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're saying you lost something that wasn't real? Naomi's eyes were steady now. I'm saying she whispered that I didn't carry a child, but I still lost a baby. Even Elina went still, because in that sentence was a grief too private for logic. Too raw for evidence, too human for the law. After the hearing, the court deferred full judgment. Naomi would remain under psychiatric evaluation for 10 more days while the district attorney decided whether to pursue charges for fraud and donor misrepresentation. Elina signed out and walked through the corridor in a haze. The words followed her like ghosts. I didn't carry a child, but I still lost a baby. How do you define loss when no one believes the thing you lost was ever yours? That night, Elina found herself back at her office staring at an open file on her laptop. A blank intake form. She thought about erasing Naomi from her memory, from her resume, from her heart. But instead she opened a new document. At the top she typed, Clinical Reflections on Trauma as Performance, the Naomi Caldwell Case. Because she realized Naomi wasn't just a patient, or a fraud, or a manipulator. She was a living thesis on what happens when identity fractures so deeply, it seeks validation in performance instead of connection. Naomi didn't just stage an art project. She enacted a public cry for empathy. And the world, Elina thought bitterly, applauded the wrong part. 3 hours later, Elina got a voicemail. It was Naomi's voice. Weak, fragile, but clear. I know you think I burned everything, but art is sometimes the only way I know how to speak. You're the only person who ever stayed long enough to listen. I'm sorry. A beat. Then softer. Please don't hate me for needing to be believed more than I needed to be saved. Elina sat in the dark. The words slicing deeper than any performance ever could. Because behind all the mirrors, all the spectacle, all the manipulation, there was still a woman. And all she wanted was to not disappear. They called it the trial without a gavel. No courtroom, no jury, no legal robe in sight. But make no mistake, Naomi Caldwell was being tried. By every outlet, every podcast, every Twitter thread dissecting her intentions as if the human mind was a crystal sculpture they could shatter to understand. The headlines wrote themselves: fake bump, real betrayal, motherhood, as performance or psychological fraud, Naomi Caldwell artist victim or manipulator. News trucks camped outside the psychiatric hospital like paparazzi at a celebrity rehab center. They zoomed in on curtains, hunted down former classmates, found a nurse who once saw Naomi Google realistic silicone belly prosthetic. It wasn't journalism. It was blood sport. By day 5 of the media storm, Elina had received 3 interview requests, 2 book offers, and a cease and desist letter from an online hate group who insisted Naomi's project was an attack on real mothers everywhere. Her inbox became a war zone. Even her clients started canceling. One email read, "I no longer feel emotionally safe in your care, knowing you support someone who mocked my stillbirth experience for art." Another, "If your friend needs attention, tell her to go on reality TV, not hijack pregnancy like a costume." Elina stared at the messages until her hands shook. She wanted to scream that it wasn't that simple. But the internet didn't do nuance. Meanwhile, sponsors began pulling their money. The gallery that once boasted Naomi's brilliance suddenly found itself fielding refund demands. A major donor, the widow of a famous painter, went on morning television and cried, "I gave her $20,000 because I thought she was honoring my daughter's memory. My daughter who died during labor," the woman sobbed, "but it was all a show. All of it, and I feel desecrated." By day 7, half the grants were revoked. But the gallery didn't fold. Instead, they released a statement that broke the internet in half. "We stand with Naomi Caldwell. Art has never been about facts. It has always been about perception. Every brushstroke is a mirror. If you felt deceived, perhaps you should ask why you believed." Social media exploded. Naomi trended for 36 hours. Elina found herself in a conference room with 2 federal investigators, a court-appointed prosecutor, and a defense attorney who looked like he hadn't slept since Y2K. The question was clear: would she testify? Not just in the clinical evaluation, but as a public witness in the upcoming inquiry into whether Naomi had committed actionable fraud. She could go 2 ways. Option 1. Submit a formal statement that Naomi had orchestrated an emotionally coercive deception with financial consequences, giving weight to the possibility of restitution orders and civil liability. Option 2. Testify that Naomi was not fully responsible for her decisions, that her actions were the result of untreated borderline personality disorder (PTSD) and long-standing trauma. That she was not a criminal, but a casualty. Elina didn't answer. Not then. That night, she sat in her apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of Naomi's story. News clippings, printouts, screenshots of vitriol, a photo from college, her and Naomi at 21 lying on a dorm floor, surrounded by junk food, laughing so hard they were crying. She played the voicemail again. The one Naomi had left from the psychiatric ward. "Please don't hate me for needing to be believed more than I needed to be saved." And Elina asked herself something terrifying. What if she had done the same thing in Naomi's place? What if the lines between healing and expression had blurred in her too? What if all of us are just a few heartbreaks away from performing our pain louder than we intended? The next morning, she walked into the courthouse. No camera crews allowed this time. The judge wanted calm, contained, clinical. She took the stand, spoke into the microphone, and the courtroom leaned in. "Ms. Caldwell did lie," Elina said. "She fabricated medical evidence. She constructed a narrative." The prosecutor nodded eagerly. But she continued, she did not do it out of malice or financial greed. She did it out of psychological necessity. She was reenacting loss in a way she could finally control. The judge raised an eyebrow. She wasn't just trying to deceive others. She was trying to convince herself she was still capable of holding life. Murmurs in the room. Elina's hands trembled slightly. "She is sick," she said, "but she is not dangerous. And she is not a con artist," Elina added firmly. "She is a woman who never got to mourn and never got to be believed when it mattered." That night, her phone buzzed with a message from Naomi's mother. A single line: "Thank you for giving her back some dignity." Elina didn't reply. She just sat by the window watching the city blur in soft, guilty light. Because in the end, this wasn't just Naomi's trial. It was all of theirs. A society that devours performance but punishes performers. A culture that applauds resilience until it sees the stitches. And a woman who stood between betrayal and compassion, trying to remember which side she belonged to. Elina hadn't spoken to her mother in over a week. Not because of anger or pride, but because she was afraid the conversation would strip away everything she was still holding together with duct tape and denial. But now the weight was too much. So she drove back to the old house on the quiet cul-de-sac where memories lingered like old furniture always in the corner of your eye. Her mother Grace opened the door in her gardening apron, hands still stained with soil. No judgment in her eyes. Just that quiet, eternal readiness. All mothers seem to possess the ability to hold space for things unspoken. They sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen. Tea steamed between them. Silence filled the rest. Elina looked down, then up, and said softly, "Do you remember the year I turned 12? Grace blinked. Yes. Elina swallowed. That was the year you stopped smiling. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. Her mother's face didn't change, but her fingers trembled slightly against the ceramic mug. I lost a baby that year, she said, before I lost the ability to tell people I had. You didn't tell me, Elina whispered. I didn't tell anyone, Grace replied, because the first person I told said, well, at least you already have one. Elina looked away. That grief, Grace said, voice steady but soft, was the loneliest thing I've ever carried. Not because it was too heavy, but because no one believed it mattered. They sat in silence again. Then Elina spoke. Naomi said she didn't carry a child, but she still lost a baby. Her mother closed her eyes. I believe her, she said. Elina's throat tightened. I do too, but that doesn't make what she did right. No, Grace said. It doesn't, but it makes it human. Elina looked out the window at the fading light. People want me to destroy her, she said, or defend her. There's no middle ground left. Grace nodded slowly. That's because the internet isn't a place for healing. It's a place for judgment and applause. But what if people never know the truth, Elina asked. They don't need to know the truth to feel something true, Grace said. But if you must speak, don't do it to protect her and don't do it to punish her. Elina waited. Grace met her eyes. Do it because your voice, your clarity might be the only thing left that's not performative. She reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. You can't save someone by exposing them. You can only save them by offering the kind of truth that doesn't condemn. That night, Elina opened her laptop, stared at the blinking cursor on an empty social media draft. She had no clever quote, no sharp critique, no performative rage or polished defense. Just a single truth. So she typed, I have known Naomi Caldwell since we were girls. I have laughed with her, fought with her, grown up beside her. And in recent months, I have watched her become the center of a conversation far bigger than either of us. What she did was not honest. What she felt was not fake. And what we're all trying to decide now is whether those two truths can coexist without canceling each other out. I am a psychologist. I believe in accountability. I also believe in trauma, and I believe above all that sometimes what people do makes sense when you finally see what they survived. Naomi survived things she never spoke of. She wore grief like makeup. She used art like armor. She failed people. And she made others feel seen. These things can all be true at once. I don't ask you to forgive her or to condemn her. I only ask that we stop expecting our pain to fit into categories. Art hurts, so does healing, so does silence. Let's make room for all three. She hovered over the post, then hit share, and waited. Not for applause, not for backlash, but for quiet. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is let the truth speak for itself. The gallery was empty now. No champagne, no murmurs, no curated lighting to cast shadows that meant something. Just white walls, soft dust, and the echo of a spectacle long extinguished. Naomi stood alone before the glass case. It was still there, the belly. The centerpiece, the lie, the artifact, the altar, the shield. A perfectly molded silicone belly, warm beige tone, faint veins painted in soft blue curvature swelling with artificial gravity, suspended inside the plexiglass frame like a sacred relic. She had once stood beside it, arms outstretched, telling a sea of admirers, this is what expectation looks like when it becomes heavier than reality. But now she was silent. Now she stood with a small screwdriver in one hand and a signature ink-smudged agreement in the other. 3 days earlier, Naomi had met with the board of funders in a back room of the gallery. They didn't scream, didn't scold. They just slid papers across the table with figures that made her stomach churn. $113,828, that was the combined sponsorship money she had accepted without ever disclosing her project was fabricated. One of the donors, a young woman with alopecia, who had invested in motherhood positive performance art, looked her in the eyes and said, you didn't just lie. You touched something I was barely holding together. Naomi didn't cry. Not there. She simply nodded and said quietly, I will pay it back. All of it, even if it takes a lifetime. She offered full rights to future sale royalties of her artwork, including the installation piece prints, audio journals, and what the gallery now planned as a documentary. They agreed, not because they believed she could fix it, but because restitution, even symbolic, was the only closure still possible. Now in that gallery's white silence, Naomi removed the final screws on the glass casing. Each twist felt heavier than the last. Not because the glass was burdensome, but because this belly had once been her armor, her vessel, her identity. She remembered when she first wore it alone in her apartment, lights dimmed, practicing her walk, cradling the silicone as if it responded to her touch. She remembered the moment she posed for the first photo, hand on belly, chin, tilted back, arched, just so. The camera shutter clicked. And in that instant, she had felt more seen than she had in her real pregnancies. Because this one didn't end in pain. This one didn't bleed out. This one stayed. Until now. The glass slid free with a soft groan. Naomi reached in, hands shaking, and cradled the synthetic womb like a lost child. She lowered herself onto the bench beside the frame. Tears didn't come immediately. They never did. But she spoke, softly, to no one, to everything. I used to think I needed this to survive, that this was my proof I existed, that I mattered, that something inside me could grow, even if it wasn't alive. Her voice cracked. But now I know. I don't need to be pregnant to be real. I don't need to make people cry to be worthy of being held. She placed the silicone belly on her lap like a farewell, then stood and left it there, unframed, uncontained, uncloaked. From across the hall behind the last dividing wall, Elina watched. She hadn't announced her arrival, hadn't asked to speak. She had come simply to witness. There had been a time when she would have rushed in, offered words, hugged, cautioned, saved. But that time was gone. Healing doesn't always ask for witnesses, but sometimes it needs one. And Elina stood still, letting the moment be. She saw Naomi walk past without noticing her, not out of avoidance, but because for the first time Naomi wasn't performing. She wasn't looking to be seen. She was simply being. Outside, the wind had picked up, spring air restless with pollen and change. Naomi stepped out into the sunlight, the first she'd felt without makeup in weeks. She didn't flinch, didn't hide. She walked down the steps of the gallery empty-handed. No belly, no applause, no shame. And Elina followed behind, 10 steps behind, like a shadow that no longer needed to be cast. Just a friend, who no longer had to fix, only to understand. It started with a cup of coffee and a blank clipboard. That's how Elina re-entered the room she had once felt exiled from. The waiting area of the Serenity Women's Center was quieter than usual. The artificial ficus had been moved to the other corner. A new receptionist greeted her with nervous energy. Everything else remained the same. The soft blue walls, the faint scent of chamomile and worry, the muffled breath of lives trying to hold it together. And there, just past the check-in desk, hung a single photograph. Naomi in a hospital robe. Not smiling, not posing, just still. Her head tilted against the light eyes, swollen but alive. Below it, Elina had written in delicate cursive on a metal plaque. Art is not a lie, it is a wound turned outward. The photo had taken weeks to find. She had debated which one to choose. Not the belly and glass. Not the TED Talk promo. Not the angry screenshots or headlines or gallery postcards. Just that moment in the psych unit garden where Naomi sat alone with no script, no audience, and no performance. That was the moment Elina wanted other women to see. Because healing, she had come to understand, was never about perfection. It was about honesty and survival, even when it came covered in silicone and grief. By her third week back at the center, Elina had restarted group sessions. Attendance was slow at first, but word spread. She wasn't the therapist who gave pills and platitudes. She was the one who knew what silence felt like when it pressed against your lungs. In one group, she met a woman named Kara who couldn't look at her newborn without crying. In another, a woman named Vania who had miscarried 3 times and still kept a box of baby shoes in her closet. They didn't want advice. They wanted space. So Elina gave them space. And in that space, stories began to emerge, not as confessions, but as breadcrumbs towards self-understanding. One afternoon, she brought a large sheet of butcher paper into the room. Draw what your grief looks like, she said. Kara drew a house with one room locked shut. Vania drew a swing set with no chains. Another woman, silent until then, picked up a red marker and wrote, "I lied and said I was fine." Elina didn't correct her. She just nodded. Because in that room, even lies were sacred steps toward the truth. Back at her apartment one evening, Elina found a letter in her mailbox. It wasn't digital. It wasn't instant. It was handwritten in slanted, careful strokes. She recognized the handwriting immediately. "Dear Elina, I won't make this long. I owe the world so many words already, and I'm tired of hearing my own. But I owe you something different. I owe you the truth. You didn't save me, and that's why I'm still alive. You didn't stage an intervention. You didn't drag me into light. You didn't cry harder than me to prove I was worth it. You just stood there and watched me fall. And when I hit bottom, you didn't offer a ladder. You waited until I looked up. And somehow knowing you were still there made me want to climb. I am not cured. I still talk to ghosts. I still flinch at lullabies. But I no longer confuse attention for affection. And I'm starting to believe that art doesn't have to hurt in order to mean something. Thank you for not rescuing me. Thank you for witnessing me. Thank you for still calling me human, even when I couldn't tell if I was one. Yours, still strange, still broken, but still trying. Naomi." Elina folded the letter and tucked it behind the photograph in her office, right next to the plaque. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just felt, and that was enough. In her final group session that month, a young mother, barely 20, skin still raw from a C-section, asked her, "How do you know when you're really healing?" Elina paused, then said, "When the story doesn't need a hero or a villain, just a witness." That night, Elina stood outside under a canopy of fractured stars. No fanfare, no gallery, no glass case, just wind and breath and memory. And somewhere out there, she believed Naomi was doing the same. Walking through the wreckage with both hands empty, both feet forward, and one small truth carried quietly inside her, that sometimes the art is not in the performance. Sometimes the art is surviving the aftermath. The room wasn't large. 40 chairs plain and unstacked. One window half open to let the early spring air move through the space like a sigh. No cameras, no lights, no frames, no installations. Just a whiteboard at the front that read in careful lettering, "The Authentic Self, a workshop for women who want to be seen without performing." Elina stood by the table near the front. A stack of handouts rested by the water carafe untouched. This wasn't a therapy session, not technically. There would be no diagnoses today, no assigned exercises, no expected disclosures. Only presence, only space. The chairs began to fill slowly, women of all ages, some alone, others arriving in quiet pairs. Most didn't talk. A few whispered about how they'd found the flyer on a community board or through a cousin who swore this changed her. Elina didn't pace, she didn't plan her words. She simply waited. And then 5 minutes before the start, the door at the back creaked open. Elina didn't turn, not right away. But she felt it, the shift in the air. The arrival of something that wasn't expected but had long been inevitable. Naomi. She didn't sit in the front, didn't glide in like before with red lips and curated grace. She walked like someone who had nothing left to prove. Hair pulled back, face, bare clothes loose and unremarkable. She took the chair furthest from the light. Her eyes were steady but softer now. She didn't wave, didn't smile. But Elina saw her. They both did. And neither flinched. Elina cleared her throat, then stepped to the center. "Hi," she said. Just one syllable and the room was already still. "I'm Elina," she continued, "and I'm not here to fix you." A chuckle from somewhere in the back. "Today isn't about therapy," she said. "It's about telling the truth without needing anyone to believe you." She glanced toward the whiteboard. "I spent most of my life being very good at appearing fine, and I worked with a lot of women who were even better at it. We wore smiles like uniforms. We told jokes as shields. We called ourselves survivors while we were still actively bleeding." She paused. "I used to think that healing meant getting stronger, but now I think it means getting softer without breaking." The room stayed silent, but no one looked away. She invited the women to speak but not to introduce themselves. Instead, she asked, "What's one part of yourself you've never performed because you thought it wouldn't be accepted?" One woman said her anger. Another whispered, "My grief." A third cried silently, covering her mouth, and then wrote something on a note card without reading it aloud. It was enough. Elina didn't analyze. She let it breathe. And as the workshop carried on, no projections, no revelations, just steady presence, she saw Naomi, sitting there, hands folded in her lap, not performing, not demanding to be seen, just being. Near the end, Elina handed out a single sheet of paper. No name at the top. No formality. Just one sentence written in soft gray ink. "You are not here to impress anyone. You are here to become someone you can stand being alone with." Some women folded it neatly into their bags. Others clutched it like scripture. Naomi read it once, then folded it twice carefully and placed it in her pocket. She never spoke during the entire session. She didn't need to. After the chairs were pushed in and the door closed, Elina remained. She was stacking papers when she noticed Naomi hadn't left. She stood beside the doorway, holding her coat in her arms like a shield. Their eyes met. No explanation, no apology, just a pause. And Elina said, not with pity, but with recognition, "I'm glad you came." Naomi didn't reply. She just nodded. And then she said so softly, Elina almost missed it, "You were right, we can't save each other." Elina nodded. "No, but we can choose not to disappear." Naomi's smile was faint but real. "That's what I'm learning now." She opened the door, stepped into the soft blue evening, and Elina stood still, holding nothing but the quiet. Later that night, as she turned off the lights, Elina passed the empty whiteboard and thought of how stories don't always end with triumph. Some end with understanding, with surviving, with not needing to rewrite the past only to let it rest. She walked out into the dark, her own reflection faint in the glass. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't look away.